1.
Charlie and Patrick need to be off. Right, good evening everybody and welcome to today's meeting of Customer Corporate Services and Scrutiny Management Committee. We're meeting this evening to discuss the called-in decision of the executive taken on the 15th of December 2020 with respect to the report titled Make It York, Impact of COVID-19, and in particular Resolution 4 of the decision sheet offers to provide a letter of guarantee to Make It York with access to a maximum of £1 million over the next 2 years should it be required. Just a quick bit of virtual housekeeping before we begin. I'd like to remind you all that we are being webcast and recorded for posterity, so I hope that you're all on your best behaviour. And I know that we're all now familiar with the mechanics of these virtual meetings, but just for the benefit of anybody watching for the first time, participants have been asked to keep themselves on mute at all times unless invited to speak, and to indicate their wish to speak by using the raise hand button within Zoom, which is visible to me as chair, but not to the viewing public. I'll then invite members to contribute in the order that I see their hands going up, unless I see members indicating to speak for the first time when others have asked several questions already. The only exception to this is when participants are wishing to make a comment or ask a supplementary question that is pertinent to the specific issue being discussed, as opposed to starting a new line of questioning. And in this instance, participants can draw my attention by physically raising a hand, and I'll try and bring them in if I can. Members of the committee will be joined on screen throughout the meeting this evening by Janie Berry, who is the Council's Director of Governance and Monitoring Officer, and by Dawn Steele, who is the Head of Civic and Democratic Services. Off screen, we have a democracy officer who will be taking the minutes and who will be called upon towards the end of the meeting to conduct any votes that may be required. And there are also some technical officers who are behind the scenes, and hopefully they'll only be interjecting if things go a little bit wrong. There are, however, additional participants who will be coming and joining us at the virtual table at specific points throughout this evening's meeting, and I'll be introducing them as and when they come into view. In terms of the meeting structure, call-ins are a little bit different to standard scrutiny meetings. So again, for the benefit of anybody watching and any members who may not have taken part in one previously, I think it's just worth setting out briefly how the meeting will work this evening. So once we get to the main agenda item, I'll first be inviting Councillor Claire Douglas, who is leading the call-in, to set out the reasons for calling the decision in. And once she's done that, members will be invited to ask her any questions that they may have. I'll next be inviting Councillors Andrew Waller and Nigel Eyre as executive members with responsibility for the area relating to the call-in to set out the executive's reasons for making the decision that they have. And again, committee members will be invited to ask questions. Senior officers will then be invited to address any issues that have been raised by members and to provide any updates on the called-in item. And again, members will have the opportunity to ask questions. And once we've received these three separate presentations, we'll then have an opportunity to debate what we've heard before latterly moving on to proposing and voting on any suitable course of action. So I'd just like to remind members that we are sitting in a quasi-judicial role this evening, and whilst I don't wish to be here all day, the call-in should not be approached as a foregone conclusion that simply splits along party lines. We are here to represent the residents of York and to satisfy ourselves on their behalf that the best and most robust decision that could have been taken was reached. And in that spirit, I'd just like to remind members of the 4 key tenets of good scrutiny, which is to act as a critical friend, to amplify public voices, to be independent-minded, and to drive improvement in public services. Now, as with all meetings that I chair, I do plan to take a short adjournment at an appropriate stage around the hour mark to give our eyes some respite, and depending on how we get on, may take a second adjournment if it seems appropriate to do so, though hopefully we can try and keep this evening's meeting reasonably to time. And so with that in mind, let's get straight on to the main bits of business. Apologies, I have received one apology for today's meeting, which is Councillor Fenton, who is being substituted by Councillor Daubney. Now, as you know, Councillor Fenton is the Vice Chair of this committee, and whilst we don't technically need to have a Vice Chair for a calling in meeting, I think given that we're remote and given that there is the remote possibility of the internet connection dropping out and me suddenly disappearing, it would be helpful to nominate somebody to be Vice Chair this evening, if only to be able to call an adjournment while we sort out the technical issues. Now, I had a brief discussion beforehand, and we suggested that Councillor Rowley would be appropriate to take on the Vice Chair responsibility this evening. evening. So if I can just see a show of hands from members that you're all happy that we proceed. That's great. I'm seeing a majority there. So Councillor Rowley, congratulations. We can add Vice Chair to your list of credits for this evening at least. And I will take us on then to item 1 on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. So do any members wish to declare an interest in respect of today's agenda? Nope, can't see anybody. So over to item 2, which is the minutes. And can those of you who were present at the last calling in meeting, which was the 21st of December, where we were discussing Oakhaven, could you please indicate if you're happy for me to sign those minutes? Okay, everybody looks to be happy. In which case, when I reach that ever-growing mountain of minutes, I will be adding my signature to that one as well as everything else. On to agenda item 3 then, which is public participation, and we don't have anybody registered to speak this evening, which means we can move straight on to the main item of business, agenda item 4, which is the called-in item, which was Make It York, the impact of COVID-19. So just to remind members, our job today is to consider just one specific decision that was taken by executive on the 15th of December 2020. And I would just note at this point in the papers that you've received for agenda item 4, there is an error just on page 6, paragraph 5. Just to be clear on part A, the executive meeting took place on the 15th of December 2020, and in part B, were the decision to be referred back to executive, it would go to a special meeting of the executive on the 11th of February 2021 in advance of the main executive meeting. And as I say, just to remind you that it's specifically calling in the decision about the letter to guarantee £1 million over the next 2 years. The call-in has been signed by Councillors Douglas, Lomas and Heaton in accordance with the Council's constitution and on the grounds that A, the £1 million guarantee over 2 years is an unacceptable financial risk to council taxpayers at a time when a new 2-year service level agreement between City of York Council and Make It York is in the process of being drawn up and due to be agreed by March 2021. B, the 2021-2023 SLA may not include all existing functions, so the £1 million guarantee should be halted for a short period, ensuring that if and when agreed, it reflects the level of Make It York's future council commissioned activities. And C, the council needs to urgently develop a system for effective SLA monitoring before it can confidently commit such significant sums of public money, notional or otherwise, to any external organisation. So as previously mentioned, I'll now invite Councillor Claire Douglas, who is a member of the Labour Group's Shadow Executive, to set out the reasons for the call-in. So Councillor Douglas has joined us now at the virtual table, and you will be given, first of all, 3 minutes to set out your case. I won't be super strict on those 3 minutes if you promise not to push your luck. And then once the 3 minutes are up, members will be invited to ask questions. So over to you, Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee, for listening to me this evening. I'm here with you to ask you, committee members, if you believe the close to £2 million financial rescue package for Make It York, agreed at executive on the 15th of December 2020, is good value for York's taxpayers, or if elements of it need further consideration. Further consideration in light of the Council's severely stretched finances for the year to April 2022 and beyond, the Council's associated ability to weather financial risk in the coming years, the performance of Make It York under its current contract that is currently being renegotiated and comes into effect in April 2021, and the unquestionable economic and therefore financial challenges Make It York are continuing to experience due to the ongoing impact of COVID-19 and the current national lockdown that currently has no likelihood of ending soon. I'll outline what we all should already know and acknowledge. Make It York carries out highly important tourism, events and economic development functions for the council. These must continue. Make It York is wholly owned by the City of York Council. It's the only shareholder. It is a TCAL company, meaning that Make It York is exempt from public procurement rules since The local authority exercises over the person concerned, that's Make It York, a control which is similar to that which it exercises over its own departments. I'm quoting TCAL case law there. Financial year 20 to 21 has been brutal for Make It York, with tourism, events, and particularly the Christmas market being wiped out. It's no wonder we find them in a very concerning financial position, but I argue we all, as members, must critically look at the position it finds itself in and try to get to the bottom of how the organisation can come back from this as a stronger, more service-focused organisation, and look at if the council is currently in a position to weather the financial risk associated with guaranteeing to pay up to £1 million of Make It York's bills over the next 2 years. I'm asking you to consider the appropriateness of the £1 million financial guarantee, given the level of risk this will bring to the council. If it's appropriate to move forward with this guarantee while the April 2021 contract between Make It York and the council is still in negotiation, and the scope of services to be delivered to the council is undecided. And finally, if the council is to move ahead with the financial package outlined, that the council put in place effective contract monitoring procedures that ensure Make It York carries out and is held to account on the full contract they have agreed to deliver, not just the parts they have developed as their expertise and can make money from. In summary, it appears to me that if we are all committed to getting the best outcome from this eye-watering level of investment, the associated value for taxpayers' money and essential benefits to our city, we must look at all these issues in the round. Now is the time to do it, and I say to do nothing would be a dereliction of duty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Douglas. So I will commend you on being almost exactly to 3 minutes, even when I'd said you could have a little bit, possibly a little bit of leeway. If I could just open it up now to members and invite any questions that anybody has for Councillor Douglas. Councillor Kilbane.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Douglas. Just in terms of the company guarantee that has been given, the £1 million letter. In the report, it says it's required for audit purposes to make sure that Make It York's a going concern. If we withdrew that £1 million, would that not make It York not a going concern?
My understanding after questioning some officers about this is that it actually isn't a legal requirement, but the problem that arises is that the current vendors to Make It York would be reluctant to deliver the services that they currently are, given Make It York's financial position. So that's why it seemed to be critical, but it wouldn't make the company collapse. And, you know, I think that whilst, of course, I have great concern about this, and I think it really needs to be considered. I wouldn't say that this is something that shouldn't be done at some point, but I don't think now is the right time. I think there are other procedures that need to take place first before we finalise putting the full package in place.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. I'm just going to jump in and ask a question whilst I'm waiting for anybody else if they want to raise a hand. And it's just on the points in which you've made the call in. There's 3 points. The first point is to guarantee over 2 years is an unacceptable financial risk to council taxpayers. And I wonder if you could sort of give an indication of what you think would be a reasonable risk, because I suppose that the balance here is wanting to try to keep a company afloat, potentially wanting to make sure that people get their redundancy were it to go into liquidation, versus not wanting to sort of throw good money after bad, if that was you know, not too sort of colloquial a way of putting it. And obviously decisions are always about balancing risk, so I wondered if you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that this is an unacceptable level of risk for the council, as I said, at this point in time, and with the situation that Make It York finds it in, and also the governance that we have over Make It York at the moment as a council, plus the fact that the SLA, the contract, hasn't been fully negotiated. So, as I said in my previous answer, I'm not fully against a 1 million guarantee if that is felt absolutely necessary, but I don't think it's the right time now. And I think until we get further assurity that Make It York is in the position that it needs to be before we give that £1 million, then it really needs to be looked at. So my overall view is that we need to stop and think about this a bit further before we commit such a high level of money to them. And also when you think about the fact, and in fact in your papers it does say on page 15, I believe, paragraphs 12 to 14, that the projections, the financial projections for Make It York, that basically the decision was made on, were all put together before we knew that we were going to have a national lockdown and that their business would be further impacted. It also does say that the contract will need to be looked at in further detail if the financial situation changes significantly. And I would argue that the national lockdown that came into effect on the 31st of December, that they wouldn't have been expecting, will do that. So, you know, the long and short is that we're just in a situation where we have not got clear enough information. I don't believe we've got close enough control over how they work. I think that we need to have a good look before we move forward with this.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. I've got a few hands gone up now. So Councillor Hollier first.
Thanks, Chair. I guess there's a bit of a question about whether or not it's a legal requirement. I'm sure we'll hear a bit going forward from officers and others exactly what the situation is. I guess my question is, if it is a legal requirement, and if withholding that £1 million led the board to basically have to wind the company up, given the sort of, you've acknowledged really the essential nature of many of the activities that Make It York undertakes, if it did become apparent that that was a legal requirement and the board would have to wind the company up if we withheld that £1 million, would that change your view on whether or not we should accept sort of grounds A and B?
I was assured before we brought this calling in that it wasn't a legal requirement, so I would be very surprised to hear that it is. But I think, again, we have to be sensible about this, and if it were an absolute legal requirement and could be proven to be so, then of course that changes the situation again, doesn't it? So I wouldn't be against that. And what we are not, or what I'm not trying to do, is we're not here to bring Make It York down. What we're trying to do is to make sure that the taxpayer gets adequate, and quite rightly, the level of value for money that they need to, and we're making an appropriate decision based on the risks that we all know exist at this point and that have actually changed since the decision was made on December the 15th as well.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. Councillor Daubney, your hand went up and then went down when Councillor Hollier asked his question. Was it a similar question, or do you have something?
Thank you, Chair. I think it was a similar question to that raised by Councillor Hollier, and I think officers will answer that particular point, how this is a legal requirement, how far is a legal requirement to allow Make It York to continue trading.
I mean, just we will obviously get to that to get clarity. I don't believe it says within the report that went to executive that it is a legal report. We've just been joined at the table by somebody that I don't recognise, so I'm just going to pause for a second.
Hello. Hello. Steve Morrell, I'm the accountant and auditor for Make It York.
Right. I wouldn't expect you to be at the table at this moment in time. So if you could just switch off your video feed for now, and we will possibly have to go to an adjournment and just deal with your arrival, because I don't have you on my list.
Right,
but when we get to an appropriate point in the proceedings, I'll invite you to come to the table.
No worries. I'll switch off.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Ever so slightly thrown me, has that? I must admit. But anyway, there we are. So I think, yes, obviously we will get to that point and seek clarity over the legal requirement or otherwise of a £1 million loan or guarantee, which I don't believe we've previously done as a council, and I don't believe is mentioned within the papers that went to executive. But obviously, if somebody wants to come and tell us something different at the meeting, that will be very useful. And I will move us on to Councillor Musson's question.
Thanks, Chair. So just a question for Councillor Douglas. What aspects of the current controls or SLA monitoring do you think needs to be improved in particular before this decision is taken? And what risk is there to the council if we carry on as we are with this guarantee, but no changes take place to anything with regards to that?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Musson. So the controls that we, I believe, and also just from many conversations, I think actually of the committee, many folks have been at various scrutiny committees, particularly around economy and place, where we've heard from representatives in the city about the support that they've had in certain areas of the Make It York contract. As you all know, Make It York is very much responsible for tourism, events, the Christmas market, and also economic development. And economic development is the area that really is the poor cousin of the whole thing. And perhaps something that might illustrate this is I don't know whether any of you have seen the most recently available accounts for Make It York that are on Companies House, and I should say the 2020 accounts are missing, and they should be on there by now. But the last count of the staff was 67 people, and that's publicly available information, and 6 of those were there for economic development, which is predominantly what Make It York was set up to do. Now, of course, it's really focused its efforts on the tourism events, and also we know the Christmas market is huge, and of course it has huge benefit to the city and what it does through those activities. But the economic development part is really important, and time again I have had it reported to me, and I've heard it in committees, that this function is not happening. Well, perhaps I shouldn't say it's not happening. It is certainly not given the focus that it needs. And some of the numbers around inward investment were the most recent examples of that. And over 2 years of the many jobs that were created in Yorkshire and Humber by inward investment deals, only 18 of those were in York out of close to 2,000. So that's not happening. I've also had reports about the fact that business incubation and business support services are very patchy. Now, we all know that this is tremendously important at this time when businesses really need our support. My view, and I hope yours as well, is that if Make It York is carrying out functions for the city, for the council, then it needs to be functioning in all of those areas. So the contract controls need to make sure that it is performing in all areas and make sure that it's actually visible to members to be able to scrutinise that and understand how its performance is holding up against expectations, and also comparing that to what the needs of the city are. There's elements around that for a start. The other element that is a risk to the council is the fact that Make It York is a TCAL company. And for those of you who know about this or don't, the special relationship between TCAL companies and the council is that it's an arm's length organisation that can carry out money-making activities. But it doesn't have to adhere to commercial procurement rules. So there's no competition needed for that contract. Make It York can be awarded the contract with no competition. But in order for that to hold up legally, then this needs to be done in a way that the council, as it does, because it's the wholly owned subsidiary, has full control, but that control also needs to be exerted in a way similar to that with which it would exert over any other department in the council. And I think all of us know that hasn't been happening, and it hasn't been happening for a number of years. And I feel that this time, this contract is a chance to take a look at these risks, take a look at these oversight responsibilities, make sure we've got it right before we move ahead with a new contract and commit a large amount of public money to them over the coming 2 years.
Thank you very much, Councillor Douglas. I'm a little bit frustrated. We've just had one member of Make It York appear in this meeting. I've now got another member of Make It York at the waiting room door. And as far as I'm aware as chair of this meeting, no invite has been sent to Make It York, and nobody has checked with me whether or not an invite should be sent to Make It York. So I'm going to call an adjournment now. I would like to understand how that's happened. And when we come back, we will decide how we're going to proceed with the rest of this meeting. So if your technical team could just bring up the holding screen for a few minutes. Right, welcome back to this evening's meeting of the Customer Corporate Services and Scrutiny Management Committee. I'm just going to wait while the various members of the committee switch their video feeds back on. We just had to take a short adjournment there to clarify what was happening with a couple of people who were unexpectedly arriving at the meeting. And we have, well, I have been advised by the monitoring officer that we're discussing this evening is an internal council decision, and therefore the representatives from Make It York who had appeared are not required for this evening. So I've thanked them for making the time to come this evening, but they won't be taking part in the remainder of the meeting. So we were partway through just discussing the reasons for why Councillor Douglas had called in the decision this evening, and I believe Councillor Kilbane had his hand up with a question waiting, and I now see Councillor Daubney had also put a hand up as well. So I'll just bring in Councillor Kilbane first and hopefully pick up somewhere where we left off.
Actually, Chair, it was a supplementary to Councillor Douglas's point from all that time ago. I'll put my hand up again for me other substantial question. Just to Councillor Douglas, you said that I'm probably not getting your words right here, so do excuse me. But essentially, you were saying that the contract previously wasn't adequately controlled. If you could just explain what you mean by that, really, not adequately controlled by who and how.
Well, any contract that is between two entities, the customer and the vendor, in this case, the customer is the council and the vendor is Make It York, the customer should be making sure that they get as best value as they possibly can for it. And of course, that comes within the processes of contract control. So there are a number of ways of doing this, but really it's about setting expectations of what that performance will be and then regularly measuring it. And in our case, I believe that that should then be made public as to whether they are actually reaching the terms of that contract. And that has been an aspect that's been sadly missing, I think, for members. I would be interested to know if any committee members who haven't been directors of Make It York, because I know we've got at least one of those here, have actually ever seen any of this data, of these metrics. I know that the shareholder committee is where this is done, but for everybody's information, the shareholder committee consists of two councillors and the executive. And their role is to oversee the four companies that sit at arm's length in some form or other to the council, when of course this is a tremendously complex area. So they see highly complex business documents and make decisions around that. And I believe actually that that committee is not fit for purpose at the moment, given the complexity of these businesses that they're sent to review. So there's a mixture of things. There's what officers need to do in contract control, but there's also the scrutiny of it that members have ability to participate in. And I don't think that we've got enough of that at the moment. That's slowly been eroded over the past couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. Councillor Pearson, I'll bring you in for a supplementary in just 1 second. You did just, Councillor Douglas, make note or make reference to there being somebody who had previously been a director, and it was pointed out to me that the Make It York website has not been fully updated. It still lists Councillor Mason as a director, and just for complete clarity, Councillor Mason is no longer a director of Make It York. So just for the benefit of anybody watching, I just wanted to be completely clear about that. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if Council thinks that the customer, i.e. the council, is constrained by the contract that they've inherited?
No, I don't. I don't know whether you've had a look, Councillor Pearson, at the articles of incorporation that sit at Companies House and describe how the company was set up. And then I've had a look at the contract as well. And it is tremendously clear that at the end of the day, the council has the ability to monitor the contract under the terms with which it is set up in the first place. And they have the ability to terminate that contract if they so choose, if they think there's underperformance. Not that I'm implying that that is what should happen, but it's written into that contract. And also they have the ability to remove directors. And as a small business owner myself, with my own set of articles of incorporation and many contracts that I've had over the years, I know that these things function perfectly adequately. So it's not to do with the paperwork. It's to do with how the council and Make It York interact. And I think, you know, we need to come back to what we're really talking about here is getting best value for public money and the best outcome for our city. And in order to do that, you know, these contracts, the articles of incorporation, the governance, the contract monitoring all needs to be done as well as it can be. And I just think that there's quite a lot of room there for improvement.
Thank you. Councillor Daubney.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to understand from our officers, ideally, since we haven't got the Make It York gentleman here with us anymore, what would the effect be on Make It York if that guarantee were not extended?
That's a question that you can put when we get to that stage of the agenda. So the way that this meeting works at a call-in, the calling-in members make their points, the executive members make their points, and then officers are available to answer any technical questions or any points of clarity. Sorry, I can't speak. Any points of clarity around those sorts of things. So if you hold your question when we get to the point where we've got the officers available, they should be able to answer that. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Last question from me for Councillor Douglas, which in the call-in, the service level agreement is mentioned, I think, in each part of the call-in, and I'm not clear what it is that you could change or potentially could change in that service level agreement that would mean we wouldn't have to put up the £1 million guarantee.
What could be changed if the council so chose was not to give Make It York responsibility for as many service areas as it has been in the past. So if that were diminished, then the amount that the council would need to guarantee would be diminished too.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to make it perfectly clear for any members of the public who are watching that it was the Chair and a couple of democracy officers who have unanimously decided that Make It York cannot be in attendance tonight, and that decision was not made by the committee as a whole.
Sorry, Councillor Pearson, I will just cut across you there. It is completely inappropriate for anybody to invite people to a public committee meeting without the Chair's knowledge. That's the bottom line. And if people want to play games with it, then we can play games, but I don't want to. I want to have a constructive meeting this evening. And if I had been notified in advance that there was any suggestion that it might be appropriate for members of Make It York to attend, then I would have entertained that and would have had a discussion and would have potentially agreed. But what I won't countenance is to have people turning up partway through a meeting in public without any knowledge. I didn't even know who on earth Steve Murrell was when he turned up in the meeting half an hour ago.
With respect, Chair, me neither.
Right, and so it's not appropriate, is it, in a public meeting to have people turning up who we don't know who they are? That's the bottom line. That's the end of it. I don't want to discuss it any further. If we're going to move on and have a constructive meeting, we will certainly be investigating how on earth it came to be that people without my knowledge had invites to this meeting. That will certainly be looked into.
This is a
right,
public
I will
committee,
move us on now.
Meeting, Chair.
Councillor Pearson, I'm not prepared to have an argument with you in public. I'm very happy to pick it up with you later on if you wish to, but that's the bottom line. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. So I've listened intently so far to what's been said, and Councillor Douglas, thank you for what you've been able to share with us this evening. My question really is about the amount of the guarantee and therefore the risk to the taxpayers. £1 million of anybody's money is a large amount of money, particularly for a local authority who are already going to be challenged financially as a result of the COVID crisis. Even with promised government funding coming through, it's still going to be a challenge for them. My question to you really is about the amount of the guarantee. So in terms of the amount of guarantee of £1 million, would your call-in have been different, or would your call-in have been less urgent had that guarantee been, say, 500,000 or 250,000 with certain caveats to release any further money? I'm just thinking around that, really.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rowley. That's hard for me to say because I haven't been privy to the level of information that some other decision makers have around this guarantee and what is needed and what isn't. But it doesn't get away from the fact that it's still a lot of money. And as you say, potentially, if Make It York doesn't make it through this period, then that is lost to the council, because the council is basically guaranteeing to pay the bills of Make It York from its vendors if it needs to, if it can't pay them itself. And that is still public money that's going to have to do that. So my feeling is that without looking at the root and branch arrangement that we've got with Make It York, how it's governed, the governance there, the contract and how it's managed, that I think I would be questioning any guarantee. I think if we get those things right, then that changes everything. But at the moment, I just feel that there's not enough control over that contract and the organisation for the council to risk money. Thank you.
Councillor Rowley, is that supplementary?
Yes, it is, Chair. Thank you. It is a supplementary, but I'm being slightly cheeky, Chair, so please just do indulge me for one moment. And I think it's really important, particularly in a public meeting, that we take individual personalities out of it. I just want to say that in terms of supporting an organisation like Make It York, for their website to have misleading information on does not fill me with confidence that there's an organisation here that's got a wonderful business plan and is forging forward. My other comment along those lines, and again, I want to take personalities out of it, but it's difficult in these circumstances. Councillor Mason, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, is a former director of Make It York, and he is now sat on this committee making a decision about the potential for funding of an organisation that he was a director of. And whilst I accept he isn't, I think he should have declared that at the beginning of the meeting, and actually some forethought should have gone into whether he actually is part of this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Jenny, can I just pick that up with you and see if you think that's a disclosable interest?
So I'm going to presume that your register of interest is currently up to date on the City of York Council's website. It is therefore, if that is an up-to-date record and you're no longer a director of Make It York, it's acceptable for you to be here on that front. The second point of this is that you as a councillor have to be confident in yourself that you're able to come to this meeting with an open mind and not give a predetermined view. If at any point you're giving a predetermined view, then you should reconsider your position on this committee this evening and perhaps refrain from taking part in either the discussions or a vote if there is one, or choose to leave the meeting if you feel you're in a personal position of predetermination. That's a decision I can't make for you. That's just the advice that I can give you.
Yeah, no, I don't think I am. I think I'm here with an open mind. And I suppose one thing that is worth pointing out is when you are a director, that it's almost flips the opposite way, and your directorship trumps being a councillor. So I can, I've got experience now seeing it on both sides. So I feel I can make balanced and reasoned listenings and decisions. But I appreciate your point, Councillor Rowley, and no idea why they still want me on the website. They must think it brings them some credit.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think we've cleared that all up, and I'm satisfied that that we can continue as we are. I'm looking around for any further questions for Councillor Douglas. It's been a somewhat interrupted and slightly eventful first session of this evening's meeting, but I'm not seeing any further hands, and I think any questions that I might have had have largely been covered. So with that in mind, I will thank Councillor Douglas for your time this evening. You're welcome to continue watching in the background, but if you could now please leave the virtual table, and I will move us on to the next part of this evening's meeting, which is to invite Councillor Andrew Waller and Councillor Nigel Eyre to join us as the executive members with the relevant portfolios that cover Make It York. Now, as I say, I wasn't expecting the both of you, so what I was anticipating was to give 3 minutes to one of you to give you your sort of little overview, but I will happily do a sort of slightly elongated and shared between the pair of you session. Councillor Eyre, if you wanted to just, was it just add something?
It was just point of clarification that I'm not the relevant portfolio holder, as you may have noticed. I'm standing in for Councillor Smalley, who is a current director following on from the previous conversation, so didn't feel it would be appropriate to attend. So I'm merely here as a substitute in many ways, a better looking Councillor Smalley, and I'll hand over to Andrew to present and just be there in case there is any need for me to act in Councillor Smalley's behalf.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. That's helpful clarification. So, Councillor Waller, as I did with Councillor Douglas, I'll give you a sort of a generous 3 minutes if you want to set your stall, and then obviously invite members to ask questions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As all members will appreciate, the pandemic has had a considerable impact on all economic activities, and Make It York is not unusual in this respect. But the way in which it was set up in 2015 meant that it was particularly prone to the loss of income from the events, and in particular the Christmas market. To have this organisation collapse at this very time in the history of the city would send all the wrong messages to business and those who would be expecting support. And the council would therefore be dealing with a situation of recruiting a new team, dealing with the old team, and at the same time trying to respond to the workload of that company, which even Councillor Douglas recognises as an activity that needs to happen. So whilst I appreciate there are many views on the future of the company, and indeed I did express my own when the company was set up during the scrutiny meetings of 2015 when I chaired ECDOS. But that is an entirely separate process, and I think one that we would be rather better informed getting on with that and the development of the new contract with all the necessary improvements to performance indicators, to measuring outcomes, and ensuring that the teams are working well indeed. One of the experiences during the pandemic has been that there has been some very close working which would need to be captured in. But I think the crucial issue for the executive was that this process was necessary as a legal requirement for the board to retain the company going forward. I note that, Chair, you've left that question for officers to answer, but I think that is the crucial aspect of the decision that was made by the executive. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and well within your 3 minutes, so it's always good to have a speedy response from an exec member. And Councillor Rowley, I've got you first with your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Waller. I would concur with both Councillor Douglas and with yourself, Councillor Waller, that it is not desirable for Make It York to collapse either at this or any stage. I think it has a vital role to play in terms of the recovery of the city, and so I appreciate your comments there. My question to you would be, again, a very similar question to the one that I posed to Councillor Douglas. £1 million of anybody's money is an awful lot of money, and for a council that is going to be in a very difficult position financially post-COVID in any way, can I just ask a question around how the £1 million was arrived at, and is it possible that that £1 million could either be reduced, or there could be certain caveats put into it as a kind of payments that are broken down, rather than just to say there's £1 million available if you need it?
The figure was derived out by officers looking at the situation. It is worth bearing in mind that a large proportion of that is money owed to the council, and therefore what this is doing is enabling the business to operate and pull itself around without landing the council with all of the liabilities that would result had the company collapsed.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Waller. I'm just looking for any further hands. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, I had the same question as Councillor Rowley, but I'll ask the officers for a bit more detail on the £1 million. Just one of the things, Councillor Waller, that came out on questions with Councillor Douglas was she raised concerns around the way that the 4 different companies that we own are controlled by or overseen by the shareholder committee, and there is concerns, given obviously the amount of money that we are putting up as backing for Make It York, that we might not be controlling it adequately, might not be measuring outcomes adequately. What do you think of that?
I would need to remind you that in my declarations of interest, I am a director of Your Waste, which is one of the tackle companies. So I don't think it's appropriate for me personally to answer that question, but there are others who.
Councillor Eyre, did you want to jump in at that point?
I think as a member of the shareholder committee, it's probably better asked of me. I think it's worth remembering that.
Sorry, just 1 second, Councillor Eyre. Janie, you just raised your hand quickly. Did you want to just clarify?
Because I'm also conscious that Councillor Eyre is also a director of a company. Is it Verito?
Yes.
So if I can answer the issues around the shareholder committee from a monitoring officer perspective, if that's acceptable, Chair. It's just that myself and the Section 151 officer are currently considering the terms of reference and the governance role that the shareholder committee has going forward. There's recently been published some public interest reports relating to governance around tech-al companies, and myself and the Section 151 officer, Debbie Mitchell, who's in this meeting this evening, are looking at ways in which we can use the findings from those public interest companies to build into more robust governance arrangements around our shareholder committee.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think what's going to potentially be quite difficult going forward is that I think some of the governance and oversight of Make It York and how the interaction is between the council and Make It York is perhaps pertinent to a fair chunk of this call-in. I mean, it is sort of specifically mentioned in the third part around effective SLA monitoring. I'm wondering how we'll be able to put questions around that if we have executive members who are perhaps conflicted in terms of this meeting. Janie, I don't know if you want to comment, and then I'll bring Councillor Kilbane and Councillor Eyre. I see your hand as well.
So the wider governance arrangements that Debbie and I are considering is more around regular monitoring of the company's performance, adherence towards a business plan, the financial profiling. As statutory officers, we are currently drawing up some proposals for consideration by representatives of the shareholder committee about how we can put much more strengthened governance arrangements in, which don't just occur occur at the time of the shareholder committee, but there are more occurring throughout the 12-month period. And then myself and Debbie are also looking at the frequency of shareholder committees as well, and trying to put some more structure around the meetings which occur at salient points of the year. It's also important for us, part of contributing to our annual governance statement and also the statement of accounts as well, from a very technical basis, which goes to the annual governance statement and the statement of accounts at Audit and Governance Committee. So we are looking at it on a very big sort of broader footprint, conscious that this might be a relatively new conversation for some members here at this moment, but we are currently looking at that and drawing up some proposals for members to consider.
So what I would suggest we do is if members have any further questions around that are related to this call-in, that we take those when we do come to question officers further on, because I just want to be clear that we're following the protocol correctly. Councillor Kilbane, you had your hand up, and then Councillor Eyre, your hand went up as well. So I'll just come to Councillor Kilbane first, and then to you, Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, it's a question for Janie, really. So we would be all right to ask questions about performance measurement, but just avoid all questions about governance.
Sorry, I was trying to find my microphone button. I think it's important that you ask the questions, and if the executive members feel that they can answer, they can, but we've also got officers here who can ask answer more specific questions around Make It York. So I'm conscious that we're supported by Charlie Croft and Patrick Looker. They'll be able to answer some of the very technical questions which governance may fall into, and also performance may fall into for Make It York from that officer perspective. So I think it's important that you ask your question, because I don't really want to say no, don't ask that, when I don't really know what your question is. So I don't want to stifle democracy, really, but I think it's important if you ask it, there's then a decision as to whether Councillor Waller can answer, whether Councillor Eyre can answer, but also there are technical officers present here who may be able to give you the technical response that you may require. I'm sorry, it's a bit woolly, but sorry.
Thanks, Janie. And Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, I think Janie and Councillor Kilbane have touched on both of it. I think there needs to be some understanding of the way these structures work, and Janie has tried a little bit. The questions I think Councillor Kilbane are after around service level agreement are about those contracts that these companies deliver on behalf of the council. For those, executive members are relevant clients. So in that case, that would be in terms of economic development, Councillor Waller. In terms of what they deliver in tourism, and that side of it is Councillor Smalley. The shareholder committee is about the performance of the overall business, which isn't necessarily part of that. So performance against the SLA, i.e. what is Councillor Waller and Councillor Smalley contracting Make It York to do on their behalf, they are questions that could be asked by those particular members, whereas the overall business operation of that company is something slightly different to the SLA.
And I'm sorry to labour the point around conflicts and all the rest of it. And I am going to come to Janie again here, just for clarity. I appreciate that Councillor Smalley is not present this evening, but Councillor Mason was explaining how, as a director of Make It York, his responsibility was to make it York, and now as a representative of the council, he sees it from the other side. Councillor Eyre, I think you're just saying that Councillor Smalley is both the customer and also the director of Make It York, and is there not an inherent conflict there in terms of the portfolio holder also having a responsibility to the company that they're a director of?
So under the Companies Act, the primary duty of a director of a company is to the company. So in decisions where we're involving, it sits as an executive member, you'd have to declare an interest, and his primary duty is to Make It York and not to the council. So you would again have to consider his position as it comes to that issue as it appears on the agenda. If he feels he's conflicted, he would have to leave the meeting whilst it is debated and not be able to contribute or vote. So that is a decision which Councillor Smalley would have to make in terms of that. I'm clearly not responsible for delegation of executive functions, portfolio functions. So it's an issue for the leader of the council.
Yeah. So perhaps it would be pertinent to ask at this point, Councillor Waller, if you could just explain how you perform your part of that function, whereby you're the customer to Make It York and you're seeking to ensure that Make It York are delivering upon the contract and what have you?
Right. Well, I had a large amount of time spent with the market issue, and other councillors on the call will recall that. And subsequent to the situation, I spent a long time discussing things and getting reports from Russell McCartney, who has demonstrated very strong management of that situation, and particularly during the pandemic, and pay tribute to him and his team for keeping the market functioning during the various lockdowns that we've had, and ensuring that that team and other members of Make It York staff worked very closely with our own economic development team in ensuring that grants to businesses were distributed as quickly as possible, and dealing with outstanding issues relating to the government guidance, and ensuring that York businesses were able to get support. And I do catch up with the relevant officer within Make It York on economic development, but have my own views on where the new contract may go on that respect, which, as I've said, I've alluded to in the original comments on scrutiny.
Councillor Kilbane, did you have a supplementary?
Yeah, just a supplementary for that, Chair, and I'm going to tread gingerly into the minefield that is conflicts of interest, but I think you'll be able to answer this one, Councillor Waller. In terms of contract monitoring, I was thinking, I think Councillor Douglas was really drawing our attention to something that's slightly more robust than keeping in touch with the different people who run different parts of the contract. So the question is, given that of the 2,000 jobs that were created in Yorkshire through inward investment in the last year, only 18 were created in York. Do you think that the contract monitoring, the measuring of outcomes, etc., is robust enough at the moment? Obviously in the light of the fact that we are in the process of securing this business to the tune of, well, over £1 million when you take the other monies into account.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. There are issues that I flagged up as needing to be included in the original contract. I have not changed my position, and therefore I would anticipate those to be something I will push for very strongly in the new contract, to ensure that they are included in the quarterly economic reports which come to my decision sessions quarterly.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. Just on that, because I think it is mentioned within the terms of the call-in, the suggestion of the call-in is that a delay to the guarantee of a month or two whilst those contracts are sorted out would be appropriate. And if you're saying that you're pushing for those things to be included within the contract, that implies that there may be some pushback. Do you not think that it would be useful and helpful to have that all clarified before we commit ourselves?
Chair, I think the key issue was to keep the company alive, and then the questions that you give to officers after me, that is an issue that you can resolve.
Thank you. Councillor Musson.
It's not necessarily a question for Councillor Waller, but it's perhaps something to highlight before we go to the officers, is that Councillor Waller seemed to indicate that he's heard from officers that it is definitely a legal requirement, and he's very sure about that. And Councillor Douglas has asked officers for advice and been informed that it's not been certain that it is a legal requirement. So I think I would find it really helpful as a committee member when we get to the officer section to kind of work out how it is that two different members of the council have received that different advice, because it does seem to be pertinent to the discussion, but I'm wondering how that's come to pass.
Thank you, Councillor Musson. I think probably the officers who are in the background will be listening to this, and we'll be able to perhaps address that as one of the first points of their address when we get there. Councillor Pearson, I see your hand up as a supplementary.
Yeah, just a point really. This would have also been a good question to ask Make It York had the committee been allowed to address them, but we were denied the opportunity by the chair, making a unanimous decision.
Councillor Pearson, can you please stop making ridiculous comments? And Councillor Mason, I can see you sniggering a little bit in the background. It's incredibly disrespectful to the chair of a committee to invite people that the chair is not even aware have had an invite, and for them to turn up. And I don't want to keep having to go round it in public. I'm afraid you've given away your right to a supplementary, Councillor Pearson. I won't be inviting you back on this topic. I've said that it's not something to discuss in public, and we will take it up in private as to how its situation has come about. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Just back to the thanks to the purpose of the committee. Just given how much the world has changed, Councillor Wallace, since you made this decision, and I bet you wish you knew then what we know now in terms of the outlook for the pandemic. I'm just wondering if you wouldn't welcome the opportunity for a pause for thought, really, as we go into the next round of the SLA negotiations.
Councillor Kilbane, in response to your question, I would like to be able to focus with other members of the council and officers on developing a strong and robust contract for the new arrangement, with a certain knowledge that the company was able to survive during.
Sorry, Councillor Waller, your very end word of your sentence, I think, just got cut off there, but I think you meant was able to survive in an ongoing way. Is that
yeah, to keep on going in order to have someone in that position.
Thank you. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. So my question was very similar along the lines of Councillor Kilbane's. However, I won't just repeat Councillor Kilbane's excellent question. What I will ask Councillor Waller, and this is in everybody's interest, obviously as the executive member with this particular portfolio, how confident are you that there's enough flexibility in the agreement that is currently in place to challenge Make It York, given the fact that the decision was made back in December with a lot of information that was presented in the report, which now is effectively out of date. And referring back to Councillor Kilbane's question, and I appreciate your answer. My question would be how much flexibility do you believe you have as the portfolio holder to hold Make It York to account with in a more robust way?
Throughout this evening's discussions, I said I would like to build a lot more into the contract to ensure that there is robust assessment and sharing of information. I think that that's a very valuable thing to have. I think in many respects the situation is something that we have worked together on as with Make It York and the council, and I think there are some, as Councillor Daubney will recall, when things were all in house, there were some benefits there. So I think it's ensuring that we take the experience of the last 12 months and ensure that it is wrapped up with whatever is still pertinent on previous discussions in a more flourishing arrangement going forward.
Councillor Musson, I see you with a supplementary. I just want to pick up a point, Councillor Waller, with you, because I was looking up the definition of tech-oil companies with SIPFA this afternoon, because to be fair, it wasn't something that was necessarily high on my list of known different types of companies. But one of the points of definition around a tech-oil company is that it has to be wholly owned, but it also has to be wholly controlled by the local authority. And from what you're saying, the contract you think isn't currently controlling it. So is there a risk that it's not actually a tech-oil company, in your opinion?
I think there are methods of reporting that would be clearer all round and would resolve the discussions tonight. And I think that our time and effort is best focused on ensuring a new contract which reflects this, and patterns of working that ensure that this is clear to executive and scrutiny going forward in terms of the spending of public.
But just for real clarity, I mean, the wording is that the local authority must exercise effective day-to-day control over the affairs of the TECOL company. Are you suggesting that that's not the case currently?
I'm not suggesting that that's the case.
Councillor Eyre, did you have a supplementary? Sorry, Councillor Musson, I will bring you in. But
I think Janie could probably come in on that point. There are mechanisms within the Articles of Association that ensure that we have control. It's not just about an SLA that exerts control. So it's how the board is structured and how it's managed, including the shareholder committee.
But we've just established that the board of Make It York has an obligation to act in Make It York's interest, not in the council's interest necessarily, although hopefully those two things align.
But the shareholder committee also reserves the right to appoint and remove directors if they believe they're not acting within the interest of the shareholder committee. So the ultimate power sits with the shareholder committee, who can hire and fire the board of directors if that's the level of control.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Councillor Musson.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to clarify some points for me, which potentially due to my lack of understanding about this, I feel kind of conflict a little bit. And it's kind of what you just got into with Councillor Eyre, which is that the executive member was basically asked, what are you doing to make sure that this is robustly monitored? And then he identified problems with the contract that might have been a barrier to him doing all the robust monitoring that he would like to do. So I think the question that I have is there anything actually in the SLA or the contract that stops you going above and beyond what's in it? Like, you seem to be implying that because of what's in the contract, you can't do all the robust monitoring you'd like to do. But does that mean that the SLA stops you going above and beyond and being a bit more diligent with it than what's written down? And then I guess what Councillor Ayres just said has kind of touched on that point, which is it's not the SLA that binds you into monitoring, and it's the fact that it's a TECOL company. So I guess I'm a bit confused here. Do you feel like you are doing all that you can to robustly monitor this, or is there something that is literally obstructing you from doing that within the letter of the contract?
Thank you. I think there are much stronger ways of working that have been demonstrated during the pandemic, which I think need to be codified, and I would like to see those in a way forward where there is clarity and understanding on both sides.
Councillor Eyre, did you want to add to that, or was?
Yeah, I think it's to provide some of that clarity. So the original SLA was set up when the company was set up. So yes, in a way, executive members throughout the history since 2015 have been bound by the SLA that was there, and you can't, in essence, be asking them to over-deliver on what was in that particular contract. So setting out a new contract is absolutely vital, but those steps and controls have increased. So I think if you recall, when the company was first set up, just so everyone knows, the only member on the board was the leader. That was the only member, the only democratic oversight. There was no shareholder committee. It was literally a board, which was the leader and the chief executive. Since that point, in making and improving that level of oversight and governance, that was expanded to 2 elected members. And as a result of further things, the shareholder committee was set up to give better oversight over the top of that. That's not saying we're perfect. It was set up in 2015. We're now at 2021. We've moved iteratively with what we had to improve governance and improve oversight. As has been shown today, there are further steps to go, and the new SLA will do that. But you are bound, when you sign a 4-year contract, you are bound within that contract. You can vary things within that contract, but only at the end of it can you start to really make more changes. And that's where both Councillor Waller and Councillor Smalley will have had huge impact in how they think the SLA can be rewritten to allow better contract monitoring as that happens. And we continue to look at the overall governance of all our TECOL companies and how we get best out of that for everybody.
Thank you. Councillor Rowley, you've got your hand up, and then I'm going to start to wrap up this section unless other people have got further questions they want to just indicate now. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. And again, this is a question for Councillor Waller. I'm sure Councillor may also want to answer. So quite rightly, we're looking at SLAs in place that are robust, that ensure that any drawdown on this £1 million guarantee over 2 years is met and then is robustly checked. number of comments have been made, not least by Councillor Waller at the beginning of his address to us, that we absolutely need Make It York to be part of the city. It's a vital organisation in terms of us moving forward, and none of us want to see it collapse. My question would be, if the SLAs aren't met at any point along this 2-year availability of this funding, if the money isn't able to be drawn down because the SLAs haven't been met, ultimately that could lead to a winding up of Make It York. I'm slightly confused as to the fact that we're saying that it's vital that Make It York stay in business, yet if we're saying this money is available over 2 years as long as SLAs are met, if SLAs are not met, we therefore don't give them the funding, therefore it may well collapse. I'm just a little bit confused about what I don't want is the council's hands to be tied, that we're so adamant that we can't allow this company to collapse, that even if it doesn't meet the SLAs, it'll still get the funding that's been promised over 2 years.
I think the key issue here is that if the company did collapse, then the council would have to do the work. And therefore, it's appreciating that whatever happens, there are key public finance decisions that we have taken by default if we allow the company to fail. Therefore, I think that ensuring that during these discussions the company is able to function puts us in a stronger position to be ready for the economic recovery when we're able to implement that based on the levels of vaccination in response to the COVID crisis.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to ask one final question, which is sort of related to the ongoing business of Make It York, and we've talked about the various aspects of the business that they undertake at the moment and may do going forward. I wonder if you have any thoughts or could give any indication perhaps of any changes to their expected business going forward, and whether or not there's anything that you might think we may actually choose to bring back in-house, for example, that they're currently doing.
I think there's considerable discussion going on with a number of partners around the city. I listened in to the comments made at the private E&P scrutiny committee. There are other discussions ongoing. This is very much an organisation that operates on behalf of the city, and therefore I think it's important that we ensure that going forward the functions are done most appropriately, and therefore I think that there will be changes around there, but I wouldn't wish to prejudge the views that are being expressed.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry, my screen just suddenly changed size and shape just at the wrong moment, so that's always slightly disconcerting when that happens in Zoom, isn't it? I think what I'll do, I'm not seeing anybody else indicating, so we'll wrap up there. And I'd just like to thank Councillor Eyre and Councillor Waller for your time this evening. And if you are available, I know Councillor Eyre, you need to be somewhere else. Councillor Waller, if it's possible for you to sort of loiter around when we get to the very final parts of this meeting, if there's anything that we wanted just to run back past you, it might be helpful if you were still able to be on the call, if that's possible. If not, no problem, we can always come back to you in a different way. And what I'd like to do is propose that we take a short adjournment at this stage. I make it 7:05 by my kitchen clock. So if I can propose that we come back, be back in the breakout room at 7:10 with a view to starting the meeting again shortly thereafter. So if you could all just switch off your video feeds and follow the instructions, and we'll see you in 5 minutes or so. Right, welcome back to this evening's meeting of the Customer and Corporate Services and Scrutiny Management Committee, where we are partway through hearing a call-in of the decision taken by Executive on the 15th of December 2020 with respect to a letter guaranteeing access to up to £1 million for Make It York over the next 2 years, should it be required. We are moving on with the agenda, but before we do, I would just like to remind all committee members that these meetings are webcast and publicly available, recorded for posterity, and I would like to think that we would be able to give a good representation of ourselves in a public domain. So next, I am going to invite council officers to address any issues that may have been raised thus far during the meeting and provide any updates that they may wish to on the called-in item. So if I could invite Charlie Croft to join us now at the virtual table. Charlie is the Assistant Director for Communities and Culture. And we also have Patrick Looker joining us at the table, who's a Senior Finance Manager. Available in the background, we also have Debbie Mitchell as the Chief Finance Officer and Neil Ferris as Corporate Director for Economy in Place, should we need to call on them. And I'd be happy for either of you to pop in and jump up to the virtual table if you think it would be helpful, rather than waiting to be invited by me. So I will hand over. I'm assuming, Charlie, you will want to kick things off, and perhaps Patrick add anything in as needed.
Patrick's going to go first, Chair.
Oh, I apologise. In which case, Patrick, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, certainly just to remind members of the decision that Executive were making was sort of, there were a number of issues in there. There was firstly the foregoing the revenue that Make It York would normally pay to the council, which is normally the net profit that the Make It York makes from the Christmas markets, the shambles markets, and so on and so forth. So that was foregone. Agreed to defer the rental payments at Museum Street, which is their office accommodation. There's the £1 million guarantee, which is was agreed, and also the £300,000 loan. I think it's worth pointing out that the foregoing of the rent and the £300,000 loan were effectively agreed sums that were available to Make It York. The £1 million is a recognition that the balance sheet of Make It York is such that it is, you'll see on paragraph 17 that the deficit of the report that went to Executive, the balance sheet of Make It York was effectively showing potentially a £716,000 deficit by the end of 21-22. So effectively, by the council offering a guarantee, it's effectively saying to Make It York, yes, you can continue to trade. The auditors are therefore able to sign off the 2019-20 accounts. I noticed that Councillor Douglas pointed out that those accounts are not available yet. It's partly because they are awaiting the decision that the council is effectively supporting Make It York going forward for those accounts to be signed off. And once those accounts are signed off, the rest of it sort of, the agreement sort of kicks in. So those were the financial elements of the decision. Obviously, there's other issues around the SLA. I think is probably more for Charlie to support and answer questions on.
Thank you. Charlie, if you could speak to that. Just before you do, I'm just going to note, I think Councillor Kilbane has dropped off the line at the moment, so I'll let tech people. Oh, I apologise. He's sent a message saying he's got internet's playing up slightly, so he's turning off his video to see if that improves the audio. So he's still present in the meeting, but just not visible publicly. So Charlie, over to you.
Yeah, can I just respond, Chair, to the point that was made about whether it was legally necessary to provide guarantee. I was asked a straightforward question about that. I would stress that I don't clearly give legal advice. That would be a matter for the monitoring officer. But I did say two straightforward things in response to the question that I was asked on that subject. I firstly pointed out that if the council did not give the financial package, it was our clear understanding that the directors of Make It York would immediately take steps to wind the company up because they believed they had no legal option but to wind the company up. And I did further point out that the council was not legally obliged to save Make It York, that the council had an option whether it wished to do that. So those were the two statements that I made on that subject.
Can I just clarify on that point, because I think it has been quite pertinent, and there's a question for you and a question for Janie within this. You're saying that Make It York said to you that they would wind the company up if we didn't guarantee them that money would be available should they need it.
No, if we did not provide the full package that was set out in the executive report, if we did not provide all elements of it, then they would then the company would not be a going concern, and the directors would have to liquidate it. So all elements of the package.
I must say that seems a little bit odd, but we perhaps can invite other members to discuss that when we get to that point. And Janie, if I can just clarify, because I've just double checked in the report that went to executive, there were no legal implications noted in the report. There's a section on property implications and risk management. So had there been a legal requirement for us to provide the £1 million, which seems to be, broadly speaking, what was being said, that would have come up as a legal implication of not doing so. Is that correct?
So in my report, the legal implications start at paragraph 29. There's quite considerable legal implications in there, but just to, okay. If you're asking about the £1 million of the guarantee, that is discretionary. It's not statutory. So the £1 million is a discretionary payment that we are making, and it offers comfort to Make It York. But the legal implications in the report, in the agenda I have, start at paragraph 29.
My apologies. I've
okay. They go on for quite a while until paragraph 32 inclusive.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. So, Councillor Rowley, you've got your hand up for a question.
Thank you, Chair. So I will just proceed my question by saying it does sound a little bit like, and I will be very careful with my words, that it's a bit of a gun to the head from Make It York to the council. That's perception is everything, and that's how I perceive that final comment that you made there, Charlie. I've got a couple of questions with regards to the facility, the £1 million facility. Bearing in mind that that Patrick's mentioned the £300,000 loan, the suspension of rent payments, I think the council has shown a tremendous level of support to Make It York already, which I would say is commendable. But seeing as the calling is around this £1 million guarantee over 2 years, my question, and it's either Charlie or Patrick that I'm sure will want to answer this, and it's in two parts really. Firstly, is there a drawdown plan that's been agreed with Make It York in terms of when they can draw down? And again, I know we've had the subject of the SLAs and the meeting of the SLAs, but is there a plan in place? And secondly, given the fact that all the figures that were presented to the executive on the 15th of December, all those figures essentially now, you can float down the River Ouse with the rest of the floodwater, because we're in a position now financially where we're in a lockdown that we have no idea when that's going to come out. So my question to you is this: is A, the plan. Secondly, when would you expect that first payment or that first request for a payment on the drawdown of the £1 million facility? When would you expect that to come forward?
Okay, shall I go first? There is no payment. It isn't a payment. It's a guarantee. It's guaranteeing their debts. It's not offering to transfer any money to Make It York. There is no drawdown. And as Patrick mentioned, most of the debt is owed to the council. Therefore, it isn't a matter of giving them money to give back to us. It is simply securing their position as a viable company by guaranteeing their debt. Patrick, I'm sure you'll want to say more on that.
No, that's absolutely right. The only element that executive have agreed is a loan of up to £300,000. Should they require more than that, we will have to take a report back to executive to consider. Charlie's absolutely right that the £1 million is effectively just guaranteeing the continued existence of Make It York in its current form, so that they can continue to trade, and the projections they have given show that they can trade back into a profitable position. Obviously, the report was written at a point in time, as with lots of our partners. I can think of the Museums Trust, GLL, plenty of other suppliers have significant financial issues, and we'll have to deal with them all in turn as and when further information comes forward. And I'm sure there'll be further reports through to executive on Make It York and plenty of other of these organisations.
Thanks, Patrick. I see both Councillor Rowley and Councillor Hollier with supplementaries. Councillor Rowley, it was your substantive question, so I'll take your supplementary first.
Thank you, Chair, and then I guess I'm done at this stage. So Charlie, thank you for the clarification of that. I do appreciate that, as I'm sure those watching will appreciate that as well. And Patrick, again thank you for your robust answer there. So the £1 million figure that was arrived at, just for me to get an understanding of what Charlie mentioned there. So we are guaranteeing up to £1 million of liabilities that would be accrued by Make It York if indeed that were necessary moving forward over a period of 2 years. So can you just explain to me a little bit how, at the point that this decision was made on the 15th of December, the £1 million figure was arrived at, and given what's happened since the 15th of December, is that still a realistic figure, or does that need to be reviewed? Thank you, Charlie.
Probably Patrick best to answer.
Well, as I said, if you look at paragraph 17, the balance sheet of Make It York is going into a negative position of around £700,000 is the figure that's quoted in the report based on the current business plan. So the £1 million obviously has an element of slack on that figure, but it's a broad representation of the liabilities that ultimately sit within Make It York. And if members and the council wishes to go down a different route, we'll have to look at those liabilities and how they crystallise within the council's accounts as well.
Thank you, Patrick.
Sorry. I think we can say that the company's position has not worsened to any significant degree in the current lockdown, because although further revenue has been lost from the company, for example, from Shambles Market not being able to trade during lockdown, they have been able to take further advantage of furlough. So there are some swings and roundabouts, but no significant deterioration in the position previously reported.
Just to clarify, and Councillor Hollier, I will come to you in a second. Just to clarify on that, though, the report does say that if bearing in mind it was written on the 15th of December, it does say if we were to go into a further lockdown, the company would lose around £90,000 per month. So are you suggesting that hasn't happened, or that isn't deemed significant?
I think it's fair to say that the first quarter of the year would normally be the quietest time for Make It York. It obviously makes most of its money through tourist activities and the city centre economy. And I think January to March is probably the quietest time for getting those revenues. The majority of its income streams will be coming through from a sort of Easter through till Christmas time is the core tourist market. So as Charlie says, we've been able to take, or Make It York have been able to take advantage of furloughing some of the staff within the visitor information centres. It would normally be the quietest time for them, and they would normally make losses over this period of year. So a lot will depend on when lockdown ends, how quickly the economy recovers, how activities within the city centre can go forward in the new financial year. And I'm sure Make It York will be updating us on that once we get better information.
So just for complete clarity, you wouldn't be anticipating them losing £90,000 this month, next month, potentially the month after as well?
No, absolutely not. I was talking to their accountant earlier today, actually, broadly the projections are similar to what we were reporting back in December.
Thank you. Councillor Hollier, I think you had a supplementary on this as well.
Yeah, just in terms of the legal requirement that we've mentioned a few times, and I guess was alluded to by Councillor Rowley. So slightly in a sort of, I guess it's a sort of negotiating tactic sort of way. But what we're talking about, I guess, is the legal requirement on the directors to wind the company up if they think it's no longer a going concern. It's not a kind of negotiating tactic against the council. That's the legal requirements that's, I guess, we're talking about. Just have sort of confirmation on that, I guess, if I've understood correctly.
Well, directors got this information direct from one of our lawyers at the council. The Companies Act 2006 state the directors owe a primary duty to the company and that must act properly and responsibly in relation to the company. Once a company is of doubtful solvency, the director's primary duty is no longer to the company and they must put the creditor's interest first. And some of that would potentially result in, one of the options would be to wind the company up.
So one of the options.
They would also look for funding from partners, loans, and so on and so forth. And so that is the option that Make It York have effectively done to come to get the support from the council. If the council can't provide that support, they would then potentially have to go and choose one of these other options.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to go through, there's a few people with their hands up waiting to ask questions. I'll just take them in the order that I see them. So first is Councillor Mason.
Thanks. Just something to say first before I ask the question. I think Patrick's point there is right. And from being a director of Make It York, when I went on as a councillor, it is a very odd setup in terms of, you know, you've been put there as a councillor, but actually that's not your prime responsibility once you're a legal director. And I think, you know, Make It York, probably like most businesses at the minute, has done what everyone's done. They've tried to, you know, negotiate with people they've got contracts with. They've, you know, deferred your rent. You might speak to your landlord. You might go to the bank and get an overdraft. You'll speak to your shareholders to raise cash. And I think, you know, that's a, you know, that's a legal thing the directors have obviously looked at doing. So, you know, I do have some sympathy. I imagine most people who've got businesses in the city have had to do similar things, negotiating with banks and creditors. I suppose my real point really was, what if this doesn't happen? Probably one for Patrick. If this doesn't happen and you know, we don't put this money in, what's the potential ramifications on the council if Make It York does close? Financial ramifications more than anything else.
Well, obviously the money that Make It York owes to the council won't come in, and then it becomes a question of how the council wants to operate these services going forward, whether they all transfer back into the council, whether we look to set up another organisation to do some of the more marketing or tourism areas. There'd potentially be redundancies to deal with across the company, and so obviously we'd have to take a full report through to executive once we've fully considered that, but it's fair to say that there would be a number of issues that would need to be resolved and a significant financial liability to the council.
Thanks, Patrick. I shall just use my discretion to ask the supplementary on that, which is, so that's what if it doesn't happen at all, but I believe the wording of the call-in is suggesting a delay until March when the SLAs are being discussed and sorted out. So what would be the implication of delaying until March as opposed to going ahead right now? And particularly, I suppose, given that you've clarified already that the company isn't losing £90,000 this month, next month until March.
To some extent, it comes down to as I mentioned before, they haven't yet signed off their accounts for last financial year because they do not necessarily consider that they can be considered a going concern, because as Charlie says, they require the full package to satisfy themselves that they are a going concern. So the ball to some extent then goes into Make It York's court as to how they take that forward.
To be clear, they are losing money. They're not losing the additional 90k, but they are not making money. The 90k was an additional loss from lockdown, not a core loss. If you see what I mean. So they would be in an insolvent position effectively, wouldn't they?
But I think if I'm understanding you correctly, it might be reasonable to think that if they knew that the money would be guaranteed from March pending the SLAs, then they may still consider themselves to be a going concern.
Well, they might also think that at some point the council could say to them, can we have our money, and effectively be loss making and not a going concern. So without the guarantee, they can't be sure that the council won't enact the requirement for the money that we are owed, which would effectively close the company.
Neil, did you have something you wanted to add at this point?
Yeah,
I see you've joined us.
Just following the thrust of the meeting's declarations, just so that everybody's aware, I'm a director of Your Waste, but I've been a Tech-Al company director for over 12 years. So just quite a lot of experience and advice that I've taken over the years in this regard. And I think the point that Patrick's just made is really important. It would be the director's decision to take a view as to their accounts and the legal position of their firm should this guarantee not be offered. So the council wouldn't have a control of that, and they would have to take a view as to whether or not they felt that the delay was something that they were able to live with from a financial perspective, or whether or not actually the delay would indicate that they may not get a decision in April. And therefore, as has been said on the call, their duty then falls to the creditors, and their creditors are in a worse position every month, because as Charlie has alluded to, it's not that they're not losing money. So their creditors effectively are getting in a worse and worse position every month. So that delay increases their insolvency and it puts into question the fulfillment of their duties. So it would be a very difficult decision for the board, and they would take it, not the council.
Thank you for clarifying on that, and apologies to everybody with their hands up, but I think this is kind of worth us digging into as pertinent point. My understanding of a Tech-Al company is that 80% of the turnover has to be with the contract holder effectively, which is us as the council. So when we're talking about creditors, we're talking about us, really. I presume that they're not more than 20% of their turnover being with third parties. And so therefore, actually, that puts us into a reasonably good negotiating position around future contracts, SLAs, etc. And so it's just about, when you're saying that by withholding for a couple of months while we're negotiating these contracts might somehow suggest that we were going to default on it, or cause them to go into liquidation, that would seem to me to be a bit of a misnomer, given that we are the main creditor.
But by saying that you're not providing the guarantee, you're effectively saying that you could ask for them to repay the monies to you as a creditor. This is under this circumstances, the council is owed money. So we could effectively say, we demand that money, and therefore that would see the company go insolvent. There have been cases where councils have allowed their companies that they wholly owned to go insolvent and leave other creditors, local businesses, in a loss position. So they've got to guard against that as their role.
I understand that, but the difference here is that we haven't done that by virtue of the other resolutions within that decision, have we? So we've written off money that was owing to us, both in terms of profits and in terms of rental, which rather suggests that we're not then going to come running after anything else. And this is about a further guarantee of £1 million, whether or not it should be part of their ongoing business. And if we're not quite sure what their ongoing business is going to be, wouldn't it be better to sort that out in order to ensure that we're appropriately guaranteeing their ongoing business as of March, April time?
As you rightly point out, you suggest you put doubt into their mind straight away with that comment. So we're not necessarily happy with the way that their businesses are ongoing. So they from their perspective as a board of directors, they've got to consider, well, actually we've got a creditor here, i.e. they owe the council money, who may not be satisfied with their work and effectively call the debt in. That's their judgment call. So I don't think you can step into their shoes as a scrutiny committee. You've just got to, for me, there is a role and a function that they've got to fulfill. And if there is a gap between the reassurance that they want, which is their right to ask, and them fulfilling their duties, that's a judgment call for them to take. So there is a risk, but as you rightly say, it's a judgment call.
Thank you. I shall go on to questions, and apologies for not coming to you all earlier. I'm going to again take you in the order I see you. So Councillor Hunter is next.
Thank you, Chair. My question is if these funds are made available to Make It York, what conditions are going to be attached to the financial help offered to them?
In terms of the loan, what we are doing is having regular conversations with Make It York as to the ongoing updates of their business plan. Should any of those change significantly, as I said before, we'd have to report back to executive and advise accordingly. These are, as you all have noticed, very uncertain times.
Okay.
Councillor Rowley, supplementary there.
It is. Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just want to get some clarification because I think the terminology around the table is slightly conflicting. Can I just assure the members, my understanding of what Charlie and Patrick have said, and I'm sure Neil will agree, the £1 million is not new money. It's not an advance. It's not funds that we're offering to Make It York. This is up to £1 million of liabilities that we effectively are going to cover for Make It York. And I think it's really important in our discussions that when we're talking about money, that we make it really clear that this is not new money. The only new money is the £300,000 loan that's already been agreed and advanced to Make It York. So when we're talking about this £1 million, it's basically increasing the liability book to the City of York Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. I think that's helpful. Sorry, yes. Charlie.
Well, I was going to say that's absolutely right. The company has those debts, or as Patrick said, will potentially have a debt up to that. With its income sources cut off, we're in lockdown, no immediate, its debts therefore far exceeding its assets, with all its income cut off, and therefore no ability at this stage to raise income. Clearly the directors, as Neil has said, it is their decision, but I think it's easy to see that with debts far exceeding assets and further losses being caused by the current situation, why they would take the view that they would immediately have to liquidate the company. So by guaranteeing the debt, which is after all owed to us, it is our ultimate liability anyway, it therefore makes sense to allow the company to continue so that it may trade and get us our money back, because otherwise that liability will fall to us, as Patrick has said, and it will be out of our pocket then.
Thank you, Charlie. So next question was from Councillor Daubney.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I just ask officers about the trading position of Make It York before the coronavirus pandemic hit the city and obviously reduced their capacity to bring customers into the city and gain income and so on from the markets and from other events in the city?
Yes, Councillor Daubney, it was operating profitably. It was providing the council a £25,000 dividend each year. It was very much, as you'd expect, very significant income shortfalls occurring because of the pandemic. Primarily the Christmas markets was probably the where they had the lost income, but they still had the expenditure to incur. They still put the Christmas lights up. They still made the city centre attractive and the cost that implied with that, but none of the income from the stalls in the city centre.
Right, thank you, Patrick. That's very clear. Thank you.
Councillor Kilbane, was that supplementary to that?
It is, yeah. Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Councillor Daubney for that question. Is there? I couldn't find the accounts up to March 2020. So have we had sight of those accounts?
Yes, we have seen sight of those accounts, and to some extent that this is one of the reasons why this has hit a sort of urgency, in that the auditors will not sign off the accounts because there's a question as to whether or not the company is a going concern. So without the satisfaction of the package, they are currently unable to sign off those accounts.
Just for clarity, that's the March 2020 accounts.
That's the March 2020 accounts, because the auditor has to be satisfied that the company is a going concern in the future.
And and having seen them, they were a profitable company at that time.
Absolutely, they were. I can't recall exactly whether in that particular financial year they made profit, but they were broadly within their business plan projections.
And just for clarity, those, I mean, I think this is stating the obvious, but those accounts are broadly pre-COVID, aren't they? So if they're the March 2020 accounts, that's only takes into account, well, lockdown came in on the 20th of March or whenever it was.
Yeah, COVID will have had very limited impact on those accounts, absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Patrick, Charlie and Neil. Would officers agree with me that it would have been helpful for this committee and, of course, the wider public to have heard from Make It York directly, regardless?
Sorry, Councillor Pearson, that's really not an appropriate question to put to officers. And I would remind you of what I said at the very start of this section of the meeting. The members of the public are watching. This is not very...
Chair,
I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate to be behaving in this way. You've had it explained to you by the monitoring officer how the decision was arrived at, and I don't want to go round and round the same things again and again. Councillor Hollier, if you're going to be asking me anything about Make It York in that context, I won't be wanting to hear it. If you're going to be taking it somewhere else useful and constructive, then by all means go ahead.
Thanks, Gerald. I'm sorry to disappoint, but I do think that it would just be useful to get a bit of clarity on what happened during that 20 minutes, just in terms of what the advice was. I mean, we've had it mentioned a few times. And I do think
the monitoring officers made her advice available to members of the committee.
But not publicly. She's not said in this meeting what happened.
I don't think it's appropriate. It is not the committee members' choice to invite anybody that they wish to the agenda, to the table. It is certainly not anybody external to the committee's choice to invite anybody that they wish to the virtual table. And as chair, it is my discretion as to who does or doesn't attend the committee and how the agenda is set out. And that's very, very clear in the constitution of the council. It's very, very clear in all the previous meetings that we've had. So we can keep going round and round. No, we can keep going round and round. We can keep going round and round. But I don't think it's
just speaking to the independent auditor 2 hours ago, we'd have told.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Councillor Hollier. I don't think this is very edifying at all to be going round and round these same points in this way, and I don't want to continue in a public domain airing any dirty linen that there may be. I am incredibly disappointed and upset at the way in which this situation has occurred, and I will be investigating and trying to find out exactly what has happened, and I will be very happy to feed back to the committee in due course my clear understanding of exactly how it came to be that people that I was not aware of arrived into a public meeting. But we cannot do that here and now in the public. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, can I just formally ask that as the Chair, you instruct the officers to disregard the last request from Councillor Pearson?
It's certainly not a question that I want to be discussing in public right now, and I think that we need to move on. And as I say, I don't think that this is very edifying, and I think that members might want to reflect on that. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair, and just say how nice it is to have the meeting professionally chaired. Could I ask the officers, in terms of the the £1 million such a big round figure, isn't it? And we know that the forecast deficit for next year is about £700,000 over the 12 months. What would have been? What do you think would have been the minimum guarantee that we would have had to make in order to make sure that it was a going concern that could have its accounts signed off? And the second question really is that, you know, for directors to make a call, and it is a judgment call, is a matter of confidence. And would they have any reason for not being confident that they would have the ongoing support of the council?
Well, the £1 million request was one from Make It York, and the view of officers was that that was not an unreasonable request, and that is why it was put forward as a recommendation. You can argue or discuss whether or not the figure should be 750, 800, 850, but to some extent, the figures presented showed a shortfall of a projected deficit of 716,000. So, as I say, £1 million did not seem unreasonable. But in terms of what actual support is recommended within the report, that figure is limited to £300,000, and we're clear within the report how that would potentially be funded. But what we're effectively doing is just accepting that those liabilities that Make It York have effectively fall back to the council.
Just supplementary. Oh, go on, Neil, if you wanted to add something to that, but I did have a supplementary question to Patrick there.
Just to supplement to that, I think what you've got in play is two judgment calls. There's the judgment call of the board of directors. What do they feel is necessary in the COVID crisis, knowing that it's not yet ended, as to what they feel is necessary for them to effectively say that the firm is a going concern. And then the second judgment call is from members in terms of the executive member decision, is do they believe that Make It York can trade itself out of that position? So, you know, if you were a board of directors, if somebody had rocked up with £10 million, you'd have gone, yeah, absolutely, no problem, we're a going concern. But then the question for the council would have been, well, do we think they could trade themselves out of 10 million? And I think what Patrick's highlighted there is the reasonableness of the decision on both sides. They've taken a view as a board of directors that they want around about £1 million. And from an executive and officer perspective, is £1 million a figure that we believe that the company could trade out of. And that's I think what you've got there is two judgment calls rather than a precise science.
Thanks, Neil. And just sort of, again, to just clarify my understanding and sort of building a little bit, I suppose, on some of what Councillor Rowley had mentioned earlier about the fact that this is a liability, and we've discussed a lot that essentially the council is the main creditor. With this £1 million access to £1 million cash that we are guaranteeing, would there be anything to stop Make It York using any of that £1 million to pay any of its other creditors? And in particular, in the event that the company did still go into liquidation, would that further expose the council to liability if money had been used with other creditors first, I suppose?
Well, I think it's important to be clear, they do not have access to the £1 million. The only access they have is to a loan of up to £300,000, and they would need to explain and show to the council why that funding was required. As the current projections show, they can trade their way out, but the cash does actually go down to quite a low figure at the end of the financial year. So it's primarily that loan is there just from a cash perspective to keep them trading.
Councillor Kilbane, was that supplementary?
Sure. You'll have to excuse my naivety in these matters of accounting, but if they don't have access to the £1 million, why would that give them any confidence that they were a going concern? Surely at some point they must be able to access it if they need it.
If the projections show they do not need it, and they are effectively their liabilities are greater than their assets, they can show through their cash flowing that they can manage these deficits without any further support from the council, but that will obviously be reviewed on a further basis. But they do need to understand that ultimately that the council will not call in its debts effectively, which would mean that they would then need that additional funding. So that's the key element of it.
So, Councillor Daubney, I'll bring you in 1 second. Just again, for total clarity, the recommendation that we're discussing, the wording is officers to provide a letter of guarantee to Make It York with access to a maximum of £1 million over the next 2 years, should it be required. That's the wording of it. But what you seem to be saying is that it's really not access to that £1 million. It's just that we won't call that liability in, essentially.
That's effectively true, yes.
So I guess just, I mean, I'm just going to chuck this out there, but, you know, we might need to be thinking about the wording of these sorts of recommendations and resolutions if what you're saying is quite different to what the average person might understand the council is being asked to agree to. Councillor Daubney, you had a supplementary as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I think I have an advantage, members, on this because I am a trustee of York Museums Trust, and we have a similar guarantee offered by the council to allow us to continue trading. And my understanding as a non-professional is that this provides comfort to the auditor to sign off the accounts for the business to continue trading. And would I be correct in that, Patrick?
Yes, that's correct.
In layman's terms.
Layman's terms, that's a correct assertion.
Lovely. So it's not actual, it's cash, it's a guarantee, and of course most of the money owed is owed to us from that. So it's a debt we have already, in a sense, or liability we have already, I should say.
Right, I'm looking around for any further questions to the officers that we have present. I'm not seeing any blue hands shooting up, so I think it's safe to simply thank them all for their time this evening. So thank you, Patrick, Charlie and Neil, and also Debbie in the background. And you're all now free to leave the virtual table. And as they've done so, I will move us into the debate stage of this evening's meeting. So just to remind members, this isn't the point at which we seek to offer opinions on whether or not the call-in itself is to go forward or otherwise, but it's just to discuss anything that we may have heard this evening, any points that anybody may want to make around anything that we've heard, or any thoughts for consideration of other committee members. Councillor Pearson, your hand went up first.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move straight to the vote, please.
There is no provision within the committee to be able to move to a vote. That's a standing order of full council, and I have double checked that with Dawn Steele last but one meeting ago.
But I would appreciate if everyone could wrap up quickly. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you. Councillor Hollier, did you have a supplementary to that?
Yeah, is it possible to suspend standing orders on that one? Direct that to Janie.
No, you suspend standing orders to remove a provision, but there isn't a provision here to remove. So there's no provision to move to the vote. It's at my discretion. If I was feeling congenial towards the pair of you, I may be more considerate to wish to move it to a vote. But as things are, I will continue on with the meeting as it stands, and we will, I'm sure, get there in due course. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chad. Just some clarification from yourself, really. You mentioned that in this debate section, we're not in a position to offer our thoughts. So I want to get to the point where I can offer my opinion and thoughts, but this is not the time to do that? I just want to know when I can do that.
Sure. So it's a little bit murky, and certainly one of the things that we're looking at doing over the next few weeks and months is clarifying the council's own constitution around the way that call-in works, and making sure that everybody's clear. But broadly speaking, there's an opportunity for anybody to discuss any of the points that they may have heard without necessarily looking at the reasons why or not they will be supporting or otherwise the call-in. So I'll perhaps start us off in terms of thinking that, you know, it's obviously been quite a lot of discussion about whether this is about giving access to additional funds or whether this is around liabilities. I think that part has been clarified. There was some debate around whether or not we were legally obliged to provide a guarantee, and I think that was clarified. And so then there's questions around oversight and monitoring of Make It York more broadly, and whether or not we want to think about that. And I suppose there may also be something in wondering whether or not it's appropriate for exec members who are board members to also be customers of Make It York, as came up earlier. So that's the kind of general tenor of this section. If you want to chuck in anything along those lines, feel free to. Councillor Kilbane. Oh, sorry, Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. In which case, I will simply say that just to add to that wonderful catalogue of points, that this original decision was taken on the 15th of December when they were looking at a set of figures and a set of accounts that in a sense were static at that point, with forecasts that for whatever reason are not realistic, and again, without wanting to kind of play my hand here, but you know, had we not been in a position where we are in a lockdown, which will have another huge economic effect on the council and upon Make It York, you know, maybe my ultimate decision at the end of our debate might have been different.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. And Councillor Kilbane, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just echoing what Councillor Rowley has said, really. I think certainly when, and something that I think you might have missed from your otherwise excellent summary is we talked to Councillor Waller. You know, we were talking about how the world has changed since the 15th of December, and he may appreciate the opportunity to have a review of that decision in the light of what's changed since. That's the impression I got, anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. Councillor Mason, you had something you wish to add?
Yeah, I think what it does highlight from my experience on Make It York is, like most businesses, there's a pattern to it, and I'm sure, you know, Councillor Rowley's business will see seasonal trends, particularly probably with bad weather and things like that, and every business has a pattern, and actually Make It York had a very distinct pattern from when I was on the board, and looking at when this decision was made and where we are now, to me, wouldn't change things. You know, I think given how the income from Make It York comes in, I think maybe if we were looking again in 6 months' time, we might think again looking towards Christmas. But, you know, from the experience I've got and knowing when their money comes in, that making a decision then, a bit like Patrick said, knowing that, you know, January, February, March are relatively quiet for income because everything's come in already. Personally, I don't think that's material at this point. And just another general point to save having to say anything again, I think another thing this debate's highlighted is how, you know, how maybe member knowledge could be improved around things like directorships of companies and, like you said, tackle companies and the different responsibilities councillors have for making those decisions and sitting on those boards.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Kilbane, is that supplementary to Councillor Mason?
Just really in response to Councillor Mason, really, I think I want to say at the point that I think the announcement of a second national lockdown is material, and that did change the forecasts from December, or it should change the forecasts if they're a responsible business, because it means that a large part of its business it was expecting to do in the spring just disappeared, and we still now are not sure when that's going to end. I don't think any of us envisaged being here on the 15th of December last year. I don't think we envisaged being where we are now, and we should take every opportunity we can to review the situation that we find ourselves in.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, Councillor Kilbane, and I did double check the timeline, and York moved into Tier 3 on the 20th of December when a large part of the country moved into Tier 4. But the announcement around the new variant of COVID and its transmissibility and seriousness was made on the 14th of December when Matt Hancock announced it to Parliament. So I think it was a very quick, fast-moving period of time, and the opportunity perhaps to just re-establish whether or not we've taken the appropriate steps given the current situation, to my mind, would be pertinent. So I think it seems appropriate to move us on to the final part of the meeting this evening in terms of decision making, etc. So we need to make a decision on whether or not to support the call-in. I'd like to remind you that the decision was called in on the grounds that A, the £1 million guarantee over 2 years is an unacceptable financial risk to council taxpayers at a time when a new 2-year service level agreement between City of York Council and Make It York is in the process of being drawn up and due to be agreed by March 2021. The 2021-2023 SLA may not include all existing functions, so the £1 million guarantee should be halted for a short period, ensuring that if and when agreed, it reflects the level of Make It York's future council commissioned activities. And finally, the council needs to urgently develop a system for effective SLA monitoring before it can confidently commit such significant sums of public money, notional or otherwise, to any external organisation. So the following options are now available to us in relation to dealing with this call-in accordance with the constitutional and legal requirements under the Local Government Act 2000. They are A, to decide that there are no grounds to make specific recommendations to the executive in respect of the report. If this option is chosen, the original decision taken on the item at the executive meeting on the 15th of December 2020 will be confirmed and will take effect from the date of the calling in meeting. Or B, to make specific recommendations to the executive on the report in light of the reasons given for post-decision call-in. If this option is chosen, the matter will be considered at a meeting of executive calling in to be held on the 11th of February 2021. And this now is the point at which I can invite members to offer any observations on the merits of the call-in and also invite members to move any proposals or suggest any recommendations in relation to the 3 points raised by the call-in. So the first hand up was Councillor Kilbane. I'll go over to you.
No, thanks, Chair. I would like to move that we support option 5B, that we give the executive member an opportunity to look again at this decision in the round. Certainly the world has changed considerably since December, but I also thought I was hearing from the executive member that they would welcome the chance to look at the service level agreement. Clearly, if the service level agreement changes, then the amount of guaranteed liabilities that we need to underwrite might change. I'm also not entirely clear that the liabilities that we are underwriting, as became clear during the meeting, are accurate. It seems to me a little bit too willy-nilly, just saying, yeah, it's $1 million. I think £200,000 or £300,000 certainly does matter to the people of York, and we should be clear about where we are looking to spend that money. But for another example, it may be decided over the next couple of months that maybe, for example, inward investment is not something that Make It York's been very good at over the last few years, and that's something we want to bring in-house. That would limit our liabilities. We might want to look at making an early call on Christmas markets, etc., and where the liability is going to be with that. So I think once we've got a clearer view on what it is we're expecting Make It York to do, we'll also have a clearer view on what liabilities we need to underwrite, and I think that we should send it back up to the executive member with the view that he reviews that decision.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. Councillor Rowley, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I think the most important thing, and I think we've certainly delivered that this evening, is to understand the role of scrutiny. And we're not saying as a committee potentially that it was a wrong decision. What we're saying is that we believe it needs to go back to the member for them to have a look at. Now, the member's quite entitled when they re-look at this, if that's the decision of this particular committee, to stick with their original decision. But I think it's prudent upon us, given the changes that have happened in the economy, given the points that were raised this evening, and again, given the fact that there is some ambiguity around the wording of the £1 million that's available, I think it would be prudent of us as a committee to support it going back to the executive member for him to have a look at it, and in the light of the comments that have been made. So I would support 5B as an option at this stage. I think it would be prudent upon us to do that, and I would like to think it would be unanimous, but we'll see.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. Can I just clarify whether you were seconding that proposal from Councillor Kilbane?
Happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Musson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to echo pretty much exactly what both Councillors Kilbane and Rowley said. I haven't really got much additional to say after they finished speaking, but I just would like to concur that there is just so much that has changed, and things that have been alluded to during this meeting that might still change. And I do think even if the decision doesn't change after it's referred back, I think it's important to consider all of that new information, as Councillor Rowley said. And just to throw another suggestion in there, because although I do also support that we take option 5B and put these 3 separate recommendations back, given the history of how our previous call-ins have gone with predictable voting splits, I think I would also like to support the idea that should that fail, we put a specific recommendation, maybe part of the 3rd bullet point in particularly to the executive, and it's certainly something which he alluded he would support and would be, more than happy to try and put more robust SLA monitoring in place. So I would imagine that in part would be something that I would hope most committee members would support if we're not able to support the full set of recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Musson. Councillor Pearson, is that supplementary to that?
Just to say that I feel this issue about the economy changing was not part of the original call-in, and therefore I won't be able to support 5B.
Thank you for that clarification. Not seeing anybody else indicating at the moment, so it has been, I suppose I will just chuck in my 2 penneth worth as well, which is broadly to echo the points that have been made by Councillor Kilbane, Councillor Rowley and Councillor Musson. I think in some respects you may find that the executive member would welcome the opportunity to look again at this and ensure that we're doing the right thing here, because this is an incredibly fast moving situation. And if you think about the timelines to this decision on the 15th of December, the report will have been published 5 clear working days before that. It will no doubt have been written sometime before that. So you're looking at figures that have come from Make It York, which are in the report at paragraph 12 on page 14, which will have been no doubt made in December, possibly in November time. And I think that the opportunity to revisit this sort of a question when everything is changing as it is, and given that we know that the executive member appears to be keen to be looking at the way that the relationship between Make It York and the council is operating, it would seem to me a very sensible decision to take that back to executive with some recommendations from this committee. Anyway, as I say, it has been moved and seconded that we as a committee support option B, which I won't bother to read out again, partly because I can't find the paper with it written down on it this exact minute. But if I could just invite Dawn, is it yourself that will be conducting the named vote?
Yep.
Yeah, if I could invite you then to proceed with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
If members are ready, could you please indicate whether you're voting for or against in relation to the motion that's been moved to refer back to the executive? Councillor Dauburnay.
Against.
Okay. Councillor Hollier.
Against.
Councillor Hunter.
Against.
Councillor Kilbane.
For.
Councillor Mason.
Against.
Councillor Musson.
For.
Councillor Pearson.
Against.
Councillor Rowley.
For.
Councillor Crawshay, Chair.
4.
So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against and 4 for, which means in effect that falls.
So that proposal falls. I think we can take it as read then that option A would be the decision taken. So that means that the executive decision is carried. Councillor Rowley, did you want to just comment?
Please, Chair. Yes. I mean, can we? I mean, do we get? I appreciate that it's been voted down, our proposal, but do we not get an option to vote on option A? Do we not get an opportunity to vote on option A?
You can do that. But, sorry, Chair. You can do that, but I think the Chair's point was going to be that in effect it's going to be the same. But if you want to go through the process, please feel free to do so.
I'm happy if any member wants to make a proposal to do that. Councillor Hollier, I see your hand went up for a supplementary, and Councillor Musson as well.
I think previously we've done it as an either or specifically for that reason, because you can't make any additional recommendations to A because it's clearly stated that it's
direct opposite.
It's the direct opposite of B. So I think there's a sort of, I mean, I don't really mind one way or the other, but I guess there's a sort of consistency issue. We've previously taken voting against B as voting for A.
You have indeed the last time you did this. That is very true, Councillor Hollier. My advice would be that if a motion falls, you should actually have another one to replace it and then vote on that. But last time you didn't do that, I would agree.
Councillor Musson.
Sorry, this might be me misunderstanding the rules slightly. And just to make myself clear as to what point I'd made previously, I was trying to, in effect, put forward an alternative proposal, which is that we emphasise particularly or make a specific recommendation on the point C bullet point, or make a sort of separate recommendation, sort of along the lines that we did with the I can't remember which call-in it was, but perhaps Janie could remind me. The one where we made the separate recommendation to look into the definition of inclusive growth and sort of pick up on the points that we had made during the discussion, which the executive member himself acknowledged would be areas he wanted to focus on. Is that option available to us at this call-in?
That's how we've previously operated.
Yeah. In the past, sorry, Chair, I'm just going to sorry. In the past, you have picked that up separately after you've dealt with the call-in. So that's what I was assuming you were going to do at this particular point in time. But once the call-in, if the committee then felt there was some additional monitoring that you wanted to ask the executive member to look at to build provision in place for, that you would do that once you dealt with the call-in, Councillor Musson.
Thank you, Dawn. That was broadly where I was going to get to until Councillor Rowley asked for the clarification. So I think just for complete clarification and by show of hands, I think it might be pertinent for us just to confirm that the committee's decision is to support option A. And so I think if I can just move that any members who are wishing to support option A could show.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm seeing 5 members wishing to support option A, and any members who do not wish to support option A, if you could now show.
4.
Okay, so that falls, and sorry, that is held, I should say, getting myself confused with which way around we are, and option A is where we are going. So then Councillor Musson had suggested that she might want to propose something around the third element of the call-in. Councillor Musson, did you have a form of words that you wanted to propose to the committee for us to consider?
I'm trying to find the exact bullet point now, sorry, Chair.
It's page 6 of your papers.
It would be something along the lines of, we recommend that the council urgently develops a system for effective SLA monitoring, so that we can be confident in our spending of public money, notional or otherwise, in any external organisation. Feel free to cut out some of that unnecessary stuff because I'm not entirely sure if the wording makes sense, but that is the general direction in which my thoughts were going.
So I'd had a similar thought earlier, and then thought it might be helpful to jot something down as well, which I think is on a similar vein. Let me test this as a set of wording, which is in order to better ensure value for public money and full delivery of the contract between CYC and Make It York, this committee recommends that executive review and reform both the contract monitoring procedures carried out by CYC officers and the Make It York scrutiny functions carried out by members. Does anybody have anything to say on as to that for wording? Councillor Musson.
Just that I like yours better, so that's fine.
Thank you. Well, I'll propose that as a form of wording to make a recommendation. If I could have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Musson. And so I'll put that to a vote. I think members happy to do by show of hands, or would members prefer a named vote? Show of hands seems to be fine by everybody. So I'm proposing that we say the following. I'll just read it again. In order to better ensure value for public money and full delivery of the contract between CYC and Make It York, this committee recommends that executive review and reform both the contract monitoring procedures carried out by CYC officers and the Make It York scrutiny functions carried out by members. So can I see all those in favour of that recommendation showing their hands now, please?
4.
And all those against that recommendation?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Chair.
Okay, so that falls as well. That's noted, very interesting, and we will take it forward from there, I suspect. Unless anybody has any further propositions or things that they wish to raise, it just leaves it for me to thank the technical officers for their time this evening and all the officers who contributed to, I normally say smooth running of the meeting, but I think that wouldn't be quite appropriate this evening. But thank you for all of your input. And it just leaves me to say good evening and close the meeting there. Thank you.